Hi everybody, and welcome to our webinar today on understanding and responding to childhood suicidal ideation. My name is Dan Moss. I'm replacing Amanda today as the facilitator of this webinar, and I would really like to welcome our presenters for today, Ariane Code, Lynn O'Grady and David Newman. It's great to have you with us. So, our role here at Emerging Minds is to create resources for practitioners by drawing on the knowledge and skills of both practitioners and parents who are supporting children experiencing distress, despair, and also suicidal ideation. This webinar is part of a suite of practitioner resources to support those working with children and families where a child is experiencing distress or despair, and they're available on Emerging Minds website under the subject search self-harm and suicide. We've just released our latest course, and you can also find a selection of podcasts and a practice paper coming out soon. So I'd also like to acknowledge and recognise the lands that we meet on today across Australia, and they're the lands of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the traditional owners of the lands on which we work, play and walk on throughout this country. We acknowledge and respect their traditional connections to land and waters, culture, spirituality, family and community for the well-being of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and their families. I'd also just like to acknowledge that today's conversations might be quite hard for some people to hear, and they might even bring up some thoughts or feelings for you. If you have any concerns about how you're travelling throughout today, please give yourself a break and reach out to those in your support network, or else you can contact one of the services in the links that we're going to provide through the resources tab throughout this webinar. In terms of the GoToWebinar dashboard, just to let you know that there's a resource list, as I just mentioned, in the resources tab on the GoToWebinar dashboard. And importantly, you can ask any question you like on the GoToWebinar dashboard question box. So thank you so much to those hundreds of people really who have provided feedback to us already and questions, and we're going to do our best to answer as many of those questions today, acknowledging that we're not going to be able to get through all of them, and we're hoping this is the beginning of a long conversation around this topic. So today's webinar is the second webinar we've convened together on this topic, and we will aim to explore the experiences of childhood distress and despair that can lead to suicidal ideation. We want to help you reflect on ethical considerations when responding to children and their families. We want to think about applying collaborative and curious approaches to support connection and understanding with children and their families, and to recognise and highlight children's responses to their hardships in ways which find children's ideas, values and skills in the ways that they've managed these challenges in their lives. We will start by discussing a case scenario, followed by some questions participants have asked us. Now, just to let you know, that case scenario can be found in the resources tab. And so for those of you playing along at home, please find that case scenario and have a read of it as our panelists discuss that scenario throughout the next hour. And again, we welcome you to ask any questions as they come up throughout today's webinar. So now I'd like to invite our panelists just to introduce themselves, and I've got a short introductory question for the three of you. So David, thanks so much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about what you're most drawn to in your work with children and young people and families around suicidal ideation.
Well, g'day Dan. I'm here in Gadigal country, also known as Sydney. Look, there's quite a lot. This theme means a lot to me. I suppose the first thing I'd say is I'm not sure if we could get a more profound um, realm, a profound theme that we can speak with people about. When we're thinking about life and death, it is really big, and I don't know if anybody here has read Albert Camus' quote that there is one serious philosophical topic, and that topic is suicide. I think maybe he's overstating it, but I do think that there is something to that. Um, I also Another thing that really kind of catches my attention, especially when working with young folks around dire thoughts or suicidal ideation, is just how hard people are fighting. You know, like I find that very, very moving. People are fighting very, very hard to find reasons to be here, um, and um, and also I think it's such an uncertain maneuver to speak with someone about it. Like it's often a very tender um, and uncertain thing to do for young folks and children to speak about this. It's very complicated territory. Another thing I'd like to say is I'd really like to interrupt the sort of us and them about suicide. I'm in the picture as well. When we speak about this, when we're talking about it here, I've got friends who have died by suicide. I have people I've known in my work who have died by suicide. I have a whole lot of people I've spoken with who have really grappled with wanting to die. I have my mother who died by suicide when I was a child. They're all there. Like I'm implicated in this. And in a sense, they're there in a way that kind of helps me feel some company in some of the incredible complexities and ethical complexities of this work. And finally, the last thing I'd like to say, Dan, in terms of what draws me to this work, is the social justice aspects of it. Um, I'm pretty interested in trying to look at the context around when people are tempted with dying or not existing. Um, so often there are terrible contexts of abuse and homophobia and marginalisation and racism and poverty, etc. I have a colleague and a friend from Vancouver called Vicky Reynolds who speaks about how hate kills, and I think maybe we need to think about that maybe some more. The extent to which people don't have reasons or can't find reasons to live because they're at the receiving end of horrid experiences in our culture. So there you go. There's a little opening.
Thanks, David. Ariane, welcome. What stands out to you when supporting children who are experiencing distress and despair?
Well, I'm a mum of 6 kids between the ages of 9 and 22. And I have children who are neurodiverse, and I have a transgender child. And we've lived through a lot of stress and challenges as a family. And I have lived experience of kids, my own kids who struggled with self-harm, suicide, ideation. And I've seen sort of firsthand how powerful it can be when you work with practitioners as allies towards helping your kids. And I've seen what can happen when a practitioner is a barrier to that. But I've also benefited because my kids are such a wide variety of ages. That early intervention when children are young can save a world of heartache later. So I'm really passionate about this stepping in when children first have these thoughts when they're younger to give them the tools that they need so that this doesn't snowball into something much more dangerous and much more difficult to deal with as they get older. So yeah, I think I've really benefited. One of my children is alive because of some practitioners who really helped us keep her
Mm.
alive. I'll always be grateful for that. So if I can contribute something to that conversation, I'd really like to be able to.
Thanks, Ariane. Lynn, welcome. What have been the most impactful or meaningful moments in your work with children and families who are navigating suicidal ideation?
Yeah, hi Dan, hi everyone. It's great to be here and great to have so much interest in this topic. I guess I was thinking about, the various times when you're working with children and families, and you go through sort of stages when you first find out about what's happening for them, and we're going to talk about that in terms of the case study today, and then different times where you feel like you perhaps you're sort of swimming a little bit, you're not quite sure, you might be quite concerned, and then you kind of get to a point oftentimes where things start to improve a little bit, and you start to see the hope kicking in, and you start to see that some of the things that we've been talking about and some things we've been working on are making a difference. And then ideally you get to the point, and I love it when people turn up to the appointment and they never know what's going to happen. So this is in my private practice work these days, and sort of checking in how things been going since last time and what's been happening. And when they can say, things are much better and the suicidal thoughts are not coming, and then you can start to then do some really rich work around, so what's happened, what's changed, how do we learn from that, how do we sort of understand what's happened and make it a really rich learning opportunity. But that hope then, and then it's from there, what do we need to do? Maybe you don't need to come back anymore, maybe push out appointments or whatever. So it's this very rich kind of relief, I guess, in lots of ways, is very real, raw kind of feeling that comes with that. But also the hope that it builds and reminds me in working, and gives me hope in working with other children and families, and even saying to them, I've been here before with people, and I believe that things that we're all doing, all of us working together, everybody trying to understand and do all the things we're going to talk about today, is going to work for us. And so creating that hope and feeling that hope in myself, I think, is really important. And they're the moments that I guess keep me continuing to be open to doing this work, I guess. So it's very special when it gets to that point, and oftentimes it does.
Thanks, Lynn, Ariane, and David. Really look forward to hearing more about you as the next hour progresses. So as we mentioned, today's scenario has been shaped by collective experiences, both from practitioners, but also from people such as Ariane with lived experience of working and supporting children through distress and despair and suicidal ideation. We're going to talk for the next 45 minutes really around this particular case study. And as I mentioned, this case study is in the resources tab on GoToWebinar. But I'll just begin to read a little bit about what we're going to be discussing. So I'm a mental health worker at the Northern New South Wales Health Service, based in the hospital. I've been working with Semi for the past 2 months, following her separation from her husband and subsequent experience of depression. I put together some details from the conversations I've had with Semi over the last 2 months that I'm pretty sure are pretty important to be considering. I'm seeking reflections and ideas from the panel on how other practitioners might proceed with a family I'm currently supporting. During our sessions, Semi has often expressed concern about her 10-year-old son, Max. Recently, she shared that Max has been saying that he wants to end his life. His school has also raised concerns, reporting that his behaviour is becoming increasingly disruptive. He frequently gets into fights during recess and lunch and has been sent to the principal office several times. In a follow-up meeting, including Max and Semi, I learned that he is quite upset about not making the school soccer team. I hear him refer to himself as a loser and says that his father hates him and never wants to spend time with him. Semi shares that things have been even more difficult since their family dog passed away last month, as he was Max's best friend. Although she has tried to speak with Max about how he is feeling, Semi says it's been hard to find the time since returning to full-time work. Additionally, Max now divides his time between his home and between Semi's home and his father's, which has caused some disruption to the normal family routines. Semi describes Max as being withdrawn and easily irritable. He often refuses to shower or change his clothes for days at a time, and she's become increasingly concerned about his low mood and what she describes as a give-up attitude, and also some behaviour like throwing stones at the neighbour's bird aviary. So I'm going to invite our panelists to provide me with some insights into how we might progress with the work with Semi and Max. And Lynn, I think we might start with you if we can. So thinking about Mac's situation, and we've heard a little bit about the context of some of his hardships. I'm wondering if you can describe in your experience what can lead children to begin to experience suicidal ideation.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. This is a big topic, and one that is fairly difficult, I think, for us to get our heads around, and often something that adults find hard to understand or to believe. Perhaps when children talk about wanting to die, it's something that that challenges our ways of seeing childhood, I guess, in lots of ways, or makes us question whether or not they really understand what they're saying. So sometimes people ask whether or not it's something, do they know that what suicide means? Do they understand death? And I guess the general sort of approach is to not to focus on that too much. Children often do understand death, but in any event, if a child is talking about wanting to die, it's telling us something that we need to listen to. And we know that even young children can be thinking about dying, and we know that from Kids Helpline data. So about 10 years ago now, Kids Helpline, the Your Town people, put together some research, and they did look at the people who were calling in, and they did find that suicide was a big topic, and even in younger children. So they broke up the data between under 14s and older, 15 to 17-year-olds, with the groups that they came up with. And they did find that about 28% of suicide-related contacts at that time, this was from 2001, 2015, I think, were children 14 years and younger. So children have been ringing Kids Helpline for a long time in relation to suicide actual contacts. And the thing that bothered me at that time and has kind of driven some of my interest in the work was that the younger group of children were more likely to not get help from adults. So they also asked questions around who helps you when you reach out for support. And that under 14 age group were getting less help than the older group. So adults around them, when they reached out, weren't then taking it very seriously. And so then these children were calling Kids Helpline to get some help from that. And some of the things I investigated there was when younger children perhaps not as serious about it, but when they asked them about whether or not they had a plan to die, or whether they had made some kind of attempt to really hurt themselves with a view to dying, they had. So 82% of that age group out of the 136 kids had actually made a suicide plan, and 54% have actually made an attempt of some sort. So they're children, so their attempts could be a whole lot of different things that maybe aren't as likely to be lethal, but they're still in the thinking, they're still doing that. And this is under 14-year-olds. So we kind of know from that research, I think, that it's really important. So then who are these children? What's going on for them? And there's very little research. It's very difficult to do research directly with children. A lot of the research that happens is often through adults. So the questionnaires or the research happens with parents or teachers or other people working with children. So there's little research really that does look at children directly. But if we think about risk and protective factors framework models that help us to understand children's development, children's mental health, and then from there suicide prevention as well. We know that family is really important to children. We know that their local community, their neighbourhood is really important to children. So they're the factors that we'd be looking at in terms of potential risks. And David already has mentioned some of these in terms of people that are going through really difficult times. So we know that conflict at home, changes at home, family separation could be one of those factors. And it's unlikely to be just one factor. It's likely, as with all suicide, we understand it's multiple factors coming together. There may be some bullying that's happening at schools. There may be perception that they're not doing well at school. It could be reality that they're struggling with school, but it could be a belief. It could be getting in trouble at school. It could be a belief that they're in trouble. It could be not feeling like they fit in, so not feeling like they belong or they fit in. It could be bullying. We hear a lot about bullying. We hear a lot about cyberbullying. Bullying and cyberbullying are very closely connected. So physical bullying and cyberbullying don't sort of happen separately often. So we kind of need to understand that as well. So it can have a relationship aspect, aspect that David mentioned as well. We know that LGBTIQ community broadly is more at risk in terms of suicide risk, and that may apply to children as well. Research is not absolutely there to support us with that, but we can draw on all of those things and keep thinking about what might be specific to the lives of children that might make this life very difficult for them, and that there's many aspects to that. And we see that in the case study. So if we think about the case study, we've got Max going through a lot of changes in his family, quite rapid changes the last few months. The dog has died. Often pets are very protective for children and for adults as well, but for children particularly, and that was described in the case study as well, that was his friend. He's feeling like his dad hates him. He missed out on the soccer team. So again, if we look at that sort of socio-ecological model, we think about risk and protective factors. There's a lot of risk factors that are there, and lots of change that's happening at that level. And we're not really sure, how Max is kind of feeling about all of that and feeling about himself in there. But there are some pretty good indications that he's struggling with a lot of these changes that have happened, and that would fit with what the theories are around what the problems could be. So it's sort of making good sense, I think, to think about it in that way.
Thanks, Lynn. Ariane, you've talked a little bit about your own perspective as being a mum to 6 children. So given your experience, what stands out to you about this case study?
I think it's very clear that there are 2 stories going on here. There's Max's story and there's also Semi's story. Semi is facing her own changes and challenges. She's gone back to work full time. She's just gone through a separation. She's had a change in living arrangements. And I think that's quite a load to carry. And she's also noticing that her child is carrying his own load, and she's got all of her worries around her child. She's noticing whether he showers or not. So, really they both need attention. I think we can tend to look at Max and think Max at the most at danger here or the most risk here if he's having suicidal thoughts. But in reality, Semi's also struggling. And Semi is the person in the best position to be able to help Max. She's the one who's with him 24/7. She's the one who's noticing things like personal hygiene, whether he eats or not, what kind of mood he's in, the fact that he is, experiencing low mood for a long period of time. And if we only address one person or the other person, a lot can get missed. I think it's really important to affirm and validate in the situation the fact that this mum is carrying her load, but she is noticing. She's doing a great job. I think there's a lot of pressure on mothers in particular to put their children first in everything. And I think that can be a really a big pressure to have to live up to being on top of everything. And she's carrying this load of her own, but she's still noticing, and she's reaching out and she's going to get him help, which I think is really amazing. Also, the fact that it's a huge energy output, I just know from my own experience, it's a lot to carry your own load, to carry your family's load. And then to see one of your children really struggling, it takes a lot of energy to fight those thoughts of, it's my fault, I've failed. I can imagine Semi thinking this is her fault. It's because of her separation. It's because she has to go back to work. She could feel like a complete failure. And I think a practitioner in this position is has a real opportunity to encourage her and affirm her and to support her as well, because it takes a lot of energy to do that. It's tiring work being an advocate for somebody else when you're fighting your own battles, and if we can help both of them, everybody wins, right?
What do you think that both Semi and Max might be hoping for when they're sitting in there speaking to the worker?
Well, I think Semi's reaching out for actual help. I think she probably doesn't know what to do, and she doesn't know where to start. She wants to take it seriously. So I think being listened to and having somebody validate your experience and not just dismiss it. You know, when Lynn was talking about how children don't get heard by the adults in their life, that's why they're phoning children's helpline. I think the same thing is true for parents. You know, you don't want to be dismissed. You don't want to be treated like you're being a hypochondriac or you're worrying too much. You want someone to listen and to affirm and to be non-judgmental. I think something that was really helpful in my experience was also when we did sit with practitioners who really reinforced the connection that I had with my child. You know, for a practitioner to sit there and say, Semi, I can see you care about Max because you're looking out for him, reinforcing that bond and connecting that bond. Yeah, validating her experience. I think a, something that a practitioner can do that a parent can't do. I mean, we all know kids listen to their teachers better than they do to their parents. You know, I can ask my kids to do tidy up their rooms 1,200 times and they'll ignore me. But if their teacher says bring a pencil to school tomorrow or else, they do it. And I think that's because there's a different relationship. And I think it's really powerful that a practitioner can ask questions, difficult questions, and tread on difficult ground with a child in a way that a parent can't. You know, I think it would be hard for Semi to be asking questions. You know, Max, how do you feel about, you know, how things have changed with me and Dad, or what's upsetting you about Dad? And a kid will always try and protect their parent, try to not be an extra burden. And I think a practitioner can ask those difficult questions and tread on that dangerous ground in a very different way. And also, kids believe things that other trusted adults say to them. So really, this could be an incredible allyship where the parent and the practitioner can work together to try and really get to the bottom of what's happening for Max. Especially if there are patterns of conflict. You know, I think quite often in families you get your little hamster wheel going of, you know, Max, why haven't you had a shower? You know, you need to shower. You know, if you smell bad, people are not going to want to play with you. And that becomes a pattern. When an outside voice comes in with a different perspective, that conflict pattern is gone and you can dig a little bit deeper. So there's a lot of great opportunity in there. No judgment. I think, who doesn't want to speak when you know that you're being heard without judgment? I think it's that's what they would probably be looking for: a safe place to be heard, to be validated, to be helped, and to not be judged, to know what comes next.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Harry. David, thinking specifically about working with Max, how would you gain a clearer understanding of some of Max's experiences?
What I will say, you know, will be incomplete because conversations they're dynamic. We hear something, we respond to that, someone responds to what we say, etc. So this is just like a possibility or some of the things we might be doing. And given what I just said, I think what we want to do is take our cues from Max. How's he sitting? What's he saying? What's the tone of his voice? What's he looking at? What's he pulling at? And we would respond to those things. We'd take our cues from Max. I would say I really try and bring a kind of a sense of collaboration to this work. There's so much that could be said about how we support collaborative practice. One thing is we would be wanting to ask questions rather than make statements. Another is that we would be very interested in what matters to Max, what his position is on things, rather than what matters to us and our position on things. Another way we can do collaboration is, and this is a little bit of a complicated point, but we can decline to be the expert. So we can understand that Max has expertise in his own life, and part of what we might be orienting the work around is Max's expertise in his life. What he knows keeps him safe. He would have something to say about that. What he knows about why he might have given up or why he's tempted to not exist. He would have something to say about that. So rather than us be the experts, we would want to understand Max as the expert. The other thing that I think can be really tricky, especially with counselling, is the possibility that it sets up isolation, and people generally, if they're really tussling with wanting to die or suicidal experience, isolation just makes the whole thing worse. So, how can we interrupt isolation in this practice, in this work? Well, I mean, there's many things we can do. Semi may well be in the waiting room. We could ask Max what would it be like if Semi joins us. Would that be useful or not? Semi may well be able to speak on behalf of Max and then get Max to comment on the extent to which Semi's got it right or not in terms of his experience. Another thing that I've done a lot in my work, especially when I worked with young folks in a psychiatric unit, is I collected a whole lot of life-saving know-how. So whenever I heard someone say, look, the way I stay alive, despite suicidal experience, is I know that I want to be a good older brother to my younger sibling or whatever, and I used to write down these stories, collect them with the person's permission, and I'd have these stories to share in one-on-one context, in family context, and in group therapy as well. So that's one way to interrupt isolation, because often what we're inviting young people to do, and children, and it's very, very difficult to do this, is to do something like individual disclosure. Individual disclosure is very, very difficult. It's quite a pressure. So if we can interrupt that by introducing other people's stories, if Max is interested, he can join a conversation that's already started rather than have to start the conversation. Okay, so I have plenty of documents of know-how, and one of those is about suicidal experience. As I said, it's called How We Deal with Way Out Thoughts, that young folks have donated to other young people that I can share, and that's a way of interrupting isolation. Yeah, well, there's a few ideas, Dan.
Yeah. So my strategies like the one that you've just described, might that help Max to kind of talk a little bit more confidently about his experiences of suicidal ideation, do you think?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I think confidence is quite a high bar. So that he's able to feel joined with others as he talks is the intention, really. That he might feel a little bit more like this is a collective experience rather than an individual experience. That would be the intention of sharing some of these documents of know-how that I've collected.
Yeah, great. And how would you respond, David, for example, if Max, is finding it a bit tougher to engage with you or is not really saying much about how he feels or his experiences? He might, for example, feel like he's there because his mum wants him to be there. How do you go about working with children and young people under those circumstances?
Yeah, look, I mean, these are just possibilities. These are some principles I use. And some of these are drawn from narrative therapy. So some people will be familiar with them. One I think that can be very, very useful is to assist Max to find a safe place to stand. Sometimes in narrative therapy, it's like a riverbank whereby you're standing in a safe place and the trauma of the river is something that you're looking in, you're not drowning within. So a safe place to stand here might be that we ask Max a little bit about his dog, actually. What was the name of the dog? If the dog could bark some kind of appreciation of you, what might it say? What might the dog say? If you could see yourself through your dog's eyes, what might the dog be barking? This might be a tender topic. We'd always negotiate this. It might not be an easy thing for Max to speak about, but that would be one option. Another way to perhaps get a safe place to stand is to maybe talk about the soccer. He was really disappointed he didn't get into the soccer team. Tell us a story about soccer and who's your favourite player and what league do you support, and we could get on to some of Max's interests. So things that are important to Max that stand outside of the territory of the turmoil. That's one way we could get onto a safe place to stand. Another is These are big points, but to potentially speak indirectly with Max. So narrative therapy has developed quite a lot of methodologies around speaking metaphorically with children, so some of you may have heard of the tree of life or the team of life. So to speak about your identities through the metaphor of a tree or through the metaphor of a team may well be a great thing for Max to speak about if he's into soccer. We would ask him, is it football or soccer, Max? What do you reckon? What's the correct term here? The other thing I would say to get onto things that might assist with Max speaking is to use his language. So suicide, the word suicide has a certain history. It arrived in a certain place, but it has become, all of this realm where people are contemplating dying has been reduced to that word. And I think that really does a disservice for the incredible complexity that can happen when people are really tempting with or contemplating dying. So when I work with young folks, they and sometimes with older people, they'll say die thoughts, they'll say way out thoughts, they'll say just wanting to die. So we ask Max, what's the best word for it? Is it just sadness? Is it futility? Is it kind of what's the point? And then we use his words, and then we can externalize it. We understand that he's in a relationship to the sadness, the sorrow, the way out thoughts. Okay, and we ask about that relationship. Another way is we seek permission. If we might say something like, Max, if we talk a little bit about this idea of you not existing, what would that be like? What would that be like for you? So we tread very carefully. And we ask permission, especially when we go into really tangled territory. And maybe if we get some time, I can speak a bit more about this, but we understand that there's double stories and we can understand that there's double tones. So there's the story of the despair, but there's always ways that Max is responding. There's always ways that he's showing up in his life. And we want to be interested in both stories. And the double toned thing, I think, is really important too. And that is, I think, if we have an unrelentingly intense conversation, I think that's in the interests of despair. So if we can bring some playfulness, potentially some playfulness, I think it can really help. To interrupt intensity in these conversations can be helpful. I do a round of dad jokes in when I do group therapy with young folks, and generally they have nothing to say. But anyway, there's a chance for me to share some very bad jokes. But yeah, anyway. So sorry, I probably said too much there. So.
No, that was great. So much rich information there. Lynn, when talking to children like Max who might tell practitioners about their thoughts or kind of even intentions that they might want to end their life, this is not without its effects, is it, on practitioners? This can have lots of effects on us as practitioners. Can you share with us some of your own insights about how practitioners might manage those emotions or reactions when they're hearing children talk about suicidal ideation?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I think it is a big topic for people, and it's not something that everyone is doing every day as well. So I guess it can come as a bit of a shock. I mean, in this situation, like with the case study, you've already perhaps heard, or it's coming through the story from the mum, so you're not hearing it directly from Max, but so you've had a bit of time perhaps to process it, and the mum's aware, and you've sort of got a bit of container around it. But if it comes kind of as a surprise, and you're working with a child and they share that with you, it can come as quite a shock. So you've got to kind of be ready, I guess, all the time for what people are going to share with us, and this can be one of those things. So there can be a tendency then sometimes for people who are not ready for that or not prepared for it to maybe overreact and ask a lot of questions and jump too quickly and not do the listening and the gathering information and sitting with it that we're sort of talking about as being very important, or to sort of underreact because you're kind of scared about asking the questions and you don't want to ask direct questions because you're a bit worried about what that might mean, and you sort of say you're hesitating. So we can have those extremes and either of those are really unhelpful. So I guess managing yourself means that you can then be ready to respond in the most useful way. So it might be a range of feelings. I mean, often there's a sadness that comes, I think, bearing witness to distress of children. And again, what I said about before in terms of how we might see childhood and how we might think about what children's lives should be like, that can be part of that. Sometimes we can feel quite angry that children have been put in these situations and the injustice or the unfairness that sits. So we might have some of those feelings as well that can come up in that space. So I think we've got the in-session kind of recognition, reflection of what's happening and what do we need to do in this space, and then your out of session reflection and preparation beforehand, ideally in terms of the work we're doing and training like this to get us thinking about this work, but then the supports that we have for ourselves outside of the session. So whether that's supervision, sometimes people contact me and can do some sort of peer consultation or have some conversations around particular contexts. And so having people that you can talk to in regular ways or as part of a group is really important, so that you can do this kind of reflecting space and thinking about what my role is in here as well is really important, so you don't feel like you're carrying all of this, which I think is often one of the things in working with children particularly. There are a lot of other people that are part of their lives, and so how do we sort of share, be responsible for our part, but share that load and encourage children to let's talk about this with people that need to know, and really important for them to know, so that you're not feeling like you're the only person that is carrying this load as well. So I think there's lots of preparation beforehand, in the session being prepared and ready and keeping yourself sort of contained, and then really recognising that this is impactful work and can be difficult work, and so a chance to explore our own thoughts and worries and feelings about it as well is really important. So I think a whole gamut of different approaches that we need to have.
Yeah, and is some of this preparation important as practitioners to kind of have us noticing when we might be stepping into that problem solver or quick fix mode?
Yeah, I think that can happen, that we want to fix it. And sometimes it can seem that here's the problem, we just need to fix it. Sometimes it can seem quite obvious if a child's telling you that something's happened in a family or a school setting. It can seem obvious to us that might be the solution, but it's unhelpful to jump in too quickly to that. So, and not including the child in planning or coming up with ideas for that. So I think it is that ability to sit, to do that listening, to create that space, encourage the child to come up with their own ideas as much as possible, or who else can help, because if a problem is solved with other people in their lives or their own ideas, well, that's going to be more meaningful to them, more likely to be successful, but also for future, that they're starting to see themselves as being able to solve some of their own problems and not needing to come and see somebody all the time to solve problems that happen. So I think there's a place for problem solving, and sometimes that is a really important thing to be doing, but not too early, and not as in us being the problem solvers. I think it's more of a collaborative supported space for the child. So yeah, being able to sit on our hands a bit and not jump into to try to fix everything straight away, because we want people to feel better. We want children to feel that things are going to be better, but they'll also feel good if we're listening and we're helping to understand what's happening first. Will be most helpful.
Yeah, great. And Lynn, we're getting quite a few questions around safety planning. And what it is that safety plan conversations can offer, what are the important components of those plans, and how can we ensure that Max's voice or what he wants is central to those plans?
Yeah, so I think people are probably familiar with safety planning generally as a concept in suicide prevention work, but may not necessarily think about them in terms of working with children. So I think we use the same concept, and then we use the language, as David said, the language that the child is using. And we're working, I think it's helpful to think about, well, safety is really important here. So we're hearing the distress, and we're hearing the problems that are in the child's life that's leading them towards having thoughts about dying. and we need to work with safety and keeping them safe at the same time. So we're sort of needing to balance both of those things, I think. So the safety planning would involve conversations about understanding it. So a lot of the information that you're gathering through hearing the child's story can go into the safety plan. So things like, when do you feel like you want to die? When do those thoughts come? Are they happening at home? Are they happening at night time, which is very common? Do they happen at school? Do they happen randomly? Do they happen when something happens, when someone says something or does something? And so you're gathering that information that you can then put into the safety plan, and that becomes that first part in terms of the triggers or the warnings that we need to maybe keep ourselves safe at that point. And then what are the things you do when those thoughts come? How do you kind of manage that, or what have you done to keep yourself calm? So that becomes those self-soothing strategies that are the next part of the safety plan. And then you might, be talking about, well, do you change the environment? Can you go to a different place? You go to a different part of the school? Can you go and have a shower, or go and be outside and play? Or can you do some things? So that's changing the environment. And then can there be people that help you feel better? The people you can talk to that are fun and good people that you can, enjoy. That could be part of it as well. And then if none of those things are working, who can you talk to and let them know? It's really important that you let them know. And that comes back to, who are the adults in the child's lives that are going to listen. And part of the safety planning is letting those people know that they're part of the safety plan. So that then opens the conversation around, well, who are the people that are good to talk to that you'd like to know? And then we need to, as part of this, fill them in on the safety plan and let them know what's happening. And that might be where Kids Helpline fits in as well, that there might be times those people are not available, they're not really hearing, they're not actually there for you. Kids Helpline, let's pop that number down as well. So really important part of that. How can we keep the environment safe? So you've got to have a sense of what, if they've got a plan, if they're thinking about hurting themselves, if they've tried to hurt themselves, how do we make the environment as safe as possible? So that's the part about the methods. And then the reasons for living is the other part of that. What's important in your life, and why is it important? Why are we talking about this now? Because we're wanting to have, to help you to be safe and to make things better. What's that about? And that can be people or future goals or pets and other reasons, things that they do enjoy or they want to do more of. So that's the safety plan, that you're gathering all of that information, and then you're using that information to go into the safety plan. It's important to keep us safe so we can work on the other problems and make things better, and then have conversations with the relevant people that we need to. And there might need to be separate, different kinds of plans for school and home. So that's another discussion point with the school. If some of this is happening at school, then what might be needed to be done at school? And that can then be a plan with the school to make school as safe as possible as well. So I think it's a really important part of the conversation, and I think it comes out naturally and collaboratively through the conversation with Max at the time. We're gathering this information. Let's put it into a plan, and also in a positive way of, what have you done so far that's kept yourself safe? We've been keeping yourself safe. How do you do that? So trying to put that positive, affirming frame around it as well, I think is really important.
Thanks, Lynn. Yes, wonderful information. Thank you so much. Ariane, you spoke before a little bit about the importance of supporting SEMI. So we've got some questions around some of the details around that, particularly, navigating parental blame and shame and fear, and some of the support mechanisms that SEMI might need throughout the process as Max navigates some of these feelings that he's having.
I think affirming a parent is always a good place to start. The fact that she is talking about what Max is going through, affirming she's paying attention, that she's doing a good job, that she is a safe enough person that Max has told her how he's feeling. I think not all children have parents like that, and I think it would be a very different conversation if the parent hadn't initiated this. Obviously, this case study has really come from a parent bringing their information about their child. Sometimes parents don't, but in this situation, I think the fact that she's doing that, affirming her, is the best place to start. Affirming the bond that she has with her son, that he's able to tell her how he feels. That means that she is doing a good job. There is a connection there. She's maintaining that connection, that even though her son is struggling in so many areas, he is talking to her about it. I think also giving her tools to know how to practically help. You know, this situation where a child is struggling with despair and with suicide ideation is something that happens inside the private life of a family, not necessarily inside of a therapeutic environment. You talk about it in that environment, but it's really happening in a home environment. And so your parent, your caregiver, is the person who is best situated on the ground 24/7 to be able to provide support, but they don't always know what that support is. They don't always know how to do it. You know, we've heard some amazing skills today, and I think, gee, some of those things I'm even scribbling notes as we go because there's so much to learn and so many practical tools. So I think giving Semi tools would be incredibly helpful. Things how to, you know, how to help him regulate his emotion, web web tools or apps that might be possible to help, mood trackers. I know one of the things that really helped us is our therapist gave us letters to the school to explain what my child might need for a period of time to make them feel safer and more able to talk about how they're feeling, what to do when they needed a space to retreat to. So even something practical like a letter. I often think of a practitioner as a bit of an anchor. You know, you're going through the storm in your private life. You're struggling to keep your child alive. You're struggling to keep your family together. You're struggling to keep yourself sane and to not sink under the load. And a therapist can be a really good anchor for you, somebody who will just be stable, somebody who can think straight and see straight and offer some perspective. And I think encouraging Semi to seek her own support, to make sure Max has his support and that she has her support. And that might be therapy for herself. It might be peer support, whether that's online or in person. I think encouraging her to call in her village, you know, to have a look who in their lives are safe adults who can invest into Max's life. You know, is there an uncle or a brother or a cousin who would love to play soccer with him or who can help build his self-esteem? So encouraging her to look at the support she already has. Also encouraging her to keep her own oxygen mask on. You know, I think mums are encouraged to put their children first and often do feel that they're being selfish if they take care of themselves. And, you know, self-care is not a face mask and a manicure. Self-care is like doing the things that enable your soul to stay refreshed, help you to maintain your own peace. I think encouraging Semi to keep herself well as well. And encouraging them to invite joy back into their lives, to find those moments. One of the things our therapist really did so well was give us this idea of making every therapy session a little reward. So we would go to therapy and then we'd go have boba together or do something that made it not hard work, but a special time together. Those are like little lifelines of hope that you need when despair feels so overwhelming, to know that you can carve out a little minute in your day to do something simple that brings you joy. Get into nature, play a card game together, so that all of your interactions don't revolve around this big idea of feeling depressed and being in despair. And I think another thing that's really good is to name the things that are good about name the things that are good about the way Semi interacts with her child. Say the things that are great about Max. You know, sometimes hearing those things from outside, it's so powerful because somebody else is saying, I see that you're a good parent. I see how smart you are, Max. I see how brave you're being through all these changes. Those words have a lot of power. And then I think that Lynn had a great point there, you know, letting the parent know what that safety plan is and what their role in it is, and when and how to escalate if things if things are getting worse, to know what to be looking for and what to do when you see those things, so that you're not in crisis in the moment trying to find those answers. I think all of those are things that will help.
Thank you so much, Ariane. That comes to the end of our formal questions, unfortunately. We are going to do some Q&A at the end of the webinar recording, which are going to be available on the aifs and Emerging Minds website at a later date. So we're going to try then to get through some more of the many fine questions that have been asked today and previously. So thank you again to our participants and audience members for asking those. But what I'm going to ask now is for each of our three facilitators, three presenters, to just provide us some final thoughts or final suggestions on this topic to end today's session. So, David, I might start with you, if that's okay.
Yep. I think the microphone's on now. Yeah. I'll go straight into it, you're saying. Okay, so the first one's pretty odd, but I'm going to share it anyway. I'm going to suggest that if you are troubled, you are unsettled, or you are unsure about how to deal with this whole thing, about wanting to die in children, and you're on the right path. I think the more, and the inverse might be true too, actually, to some extent. If we really are clear about this, I don't think we've engaged enough with the complexity of it. I don't think we've engaged enough with the incredible ethical quagmire that is this realm. Okay, so that's maybe a strange thing to say, but you're on the right path if you're unsettled. I think when we're not unsettled, maybe things are going wrong. The other one is I would say accountability and co-research is key to this. I think if we can regularly seek feedback about what we're doing, how we're doing it, the effects of what we're doing from children, especially because their voices get most marginalised or very much so marginalised. I've developed a document that when I worked at the psychiatric unit, and it was just featured around the question, how would you like carers and mental health workers to respond to you when you're really grappling with wanting to live and grappling with wanting to die? I created a document called How You Can Help Us. And it's a really great sort of collection of ideas these young people have very generously offered. I think we can just consult. We can really put children at the centre of the know-how. The epistemology is really can really revolve around children's knowledges. Now, the third thing I would say is therapy and counselling, and sometimes our field can really individualise this, and that can be life-saving. Let's not trivialise what can happen in counselling and family work. But I would really hope for how can we make this a collective responsibility, not an individual responsibility, especially the individual responsibility of young people and children who are grappling with wanting to die. So there is, I think, a lot we can do to make life much more livable. We have issues of climate catastrophe. We have issues of incredibly problematic child abuse. We have issues of racism, transphobia, etc. How can we make this a collective responsibility?
Thank you so much, David, and for all your insights today. Ariane, how about for you, a final takeaway message?
I would just say I think that it's really working in this area. It's a collaboration between the families, the parents, the child, and the practitioners. None of us have to do this on our own. It is overwhelming for any one person to carry the responsibility of an outcome in a child's mental health. But if we all work together, that load is shared. If we all work together, we have the same goal, that we want a child who can grow through this and learn the skills that they need and have a fulfilling life. And it's something we can do together. The pressure isn't on any one person to have to get it right. We can work together and pool our, experiences, our knowledge, and get there in the end. We want healthy kids. That's what we want.
Thank you, Ariane. Really appreciate your lived experience today. It's been wonderful. And Lynn, a final takeaway message from you.
Yeah, well, all of the above. I think I agree with everything that's been said. But I think one of the things in um, practitioners working in this space can feel a bit overwhelming, perhaps, or thinking that you really need to do things differently. But I think thinking about what we do well, what our strengths are, what works best with children when we're working with them and their parents, because we can't really think about working with children without thinking about families. So think about what we do well and then holding on to those things and keep doing that, because you have those skills already for doing this work and you're continuing to develop them. And then just add on some of the things we've talked about today in terms of things for you to be aware about, things about doing some of your own processing about this information and being prepared for it. But don't feel like you've got to, do things completely differently or learn a whole lot of new skills. The importance of listening, the importance of collaborating, the importance of being with the child, being playful when you need to be, when you can be, all of those skills that you have with working with children and with families will hold you well. And then you just gather a little bit more information around the sides, a bit more of the sort of specialised information that will help you be well equipped to do this work and to have a level of confidence to be able to do it as well, so that you're not missing things or not feeling that you can go to spaces of having the conversations that you need to have with people.
Great, thank you. Would you please thank our presenters today, Dr. Lynn O'Grady, Ariane Code and David Newman. I think you'll agree that the level of insight and practice that we've been able to hear about today has been fantastic. So thank you very much. Thank you to our audience. Wonderful questions, and if David's comment around considering the ethical complexity within this work is a guideline, then the questions really do show that an audience like this is really engaged in some of those questions and ethical complexities, which is really great to see. Please subscribe to either the Emerging Minds or the aifs website to get details of the recording of this webinar, which will be coming out in the coming weeks. And other resources as well that we've talked about today are available on both the aifs and Emerging Minds websites. Please take some time to complete the survey as your feedback regarding today and other webinars continues to be really important to us. Thank you so much for being with us today and for your continued contribution and commitment to working with children and their families. And take care, and we look forward to joining you next time. Thank you. Hi everybody, and welcome back to what is the extended Q&A section of our webinar. Please welcome back our panelists, Dr. Lynn O'Grady, Ariane Code and David Newman. And we've got some more questions for you folk, which we've been provided by our learners who have been through this webinar for the last hour with us. And we're going to start with you, David. A question around the importance for the practitioner to facilitate the child's own understandings of what's going on, and how, as practitioners, we can ensure that our own assumptions about the problem don't overshadow Max's own experiences or perspectives.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Dan. Look, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with the work of David Webb, who's when he completed his PhD, he said it was the first PhD written by someone who was actively suicidal. The name of the book that came from his PhD research was Contemplating the Urge to Die. Now, one of the key critiques he made of the realm of suicidology is that it almost entirely misses the experience of those who have been suicidal. And he calls for what he named as a first-person approach to suicidology. Narrative therapy terms, it could be insider knowledge or insider accounts. So there's that realm that those who are contemplating dying can be left out of knowledge. They can be on the other side of knowledge. Plus, So that's one realm of marginalisation. The other realm of marginalisation, of course, is the power relations of age. So when we're talking with children, their knowledge, their understandings just get they get marginalised, they get discounted as not enough, as immature, etc. And so we really do want to think about this double marginalisation that can happen with children when they're experiencing or grappling with wanting to die. So that's I'd say we might call that in the ethical realm. In terms of the practice of it, if we include children's understandings, we're much less likely for them to experience isolation. And I think isolation is just one of the key ingredients for despair to just grow and to have more tentacles in people's lives and families' lives, communities' lives. So we interrupt isolation if we're facilitating children's understandings. The other thing, look, we are much, if we don't facilitate children's understandings, we're missing out on children's skills and knowledges. And I would say that's a key thing we ought to be doing here. We ought to be shining a light on what children know, what children have been responding to, what they've been grappling with. I was speaking the other day in a family, and a brother said that he did speak to his sister about how he's contemplating dying. Now, this is it was a small act. It only happened for 30 seconds or something. But this is a very significant act, and these things could be storied. Now, this is children's know-how about how they might support each other through some of the darkest of times, rather than, for instance, how practitioners or adults support children. Yeah, so that's one thing we really, I think, want to be doing, and why we might want to be facilitating child's understandings. Now, the second question you had is how practitioners can become aware of their own assumptions and not overshadow, say, for instance, Max's perspective. Yeah, look, I think I'd just say two things here. There's probably a lot to say, but one would be just developing the practice, developing the skill of asking a question rather than making a statement. If you feel like you want to make a statement, try and turn it into a question. That's a simple practice skill development. The other is, I think, if practitioners and people who aren't practitioners are aware of the models and the psychological theories that they hold, okay, because then they know when they're implementing these models and psychological theories and specifying people's lives. So because we all have ideas, if we're in this field, we've been trained, but also broadly we have ideas about what is psychological health. But when we impose them, I think we're really robbing people of agency and an opportunity for them to know their own expertise. So I think just really being aware of the theories and models that we hold and just trying to keep it at the edge of the conversation. So when we're tempted to say, really, I think affect regulation is required here, we might just think, well, that's a psychological theory. Maybe I don't need to impose that onto this child's life. And in fact, if we were talking 30 years ago, we would be talking about affect discharge. So these things are cultural, they are contextual, they're contingent about what is apparently psychological health. So anyway.
Great. Thank you, David. One more question I have for you is that there's been some further questions around this idea that you talked about double listening, about the importance of listening to both the stories of the hardship that children and their families are navigating, but also listening to the ways in which children in particular are dealing with, or the skills and know-how they're using to attempt to overcome some of those hardships. I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about your experience of using double listening in practice.
Yeah, look, I think it's a question of kind of practicing it if you have an interest in it. So never just rushing to whatever it is the response is, or whatever it is that we might call the solution story or something, but to really get a sense of just what's tough, what the turmoil is. Making room for that is really so very important, especially in the context of power relations of age, when children often can't speak or find it very hard to speak of hardship. But I think we are always listening for what's outside of it, and sometimes that can be the smallest of things. So when I hear young people, for instance, or children say, look, I just don't want to go on because I'm a burden to everyone. Okay, that's the expression of despair, perhaps. But there's also something we might listen for in that, and that is the importance maybe that child has for the effect that they have on other people. You know, they might really care about the effect that they have on other people. And this might be quite a loving or caring kind of gesture. That would be maybe an opening to another story. Okay, so sometimes these other stories, when we're doing double listening, are very slim, but we really want to pick up on it. Sometimes people will say things like, I've tried, and I'm always back at square one. We might want to acknowledge that can be hard, but we also might want to acknowledge the steps and the effort and the trying. And where did they go to if it wasn't at square one? Okay, so that's another opening for a second story, would say, the story that's not despair. How come they tried? What was the effort that they made? These are questions we can ask to just prise open the other territory that's out of despair's territory.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, David. Lynn, in the case study that we've considered today, where we've been working with Max and Semi, there's some mention of Dad, who's recently separated from Semi, and a worry for Max is that his father doesn't want to spend time with him. How important, even though Dad's not present in these conversations at the moment, would it be for you as a practitioner to be kind of bringing Dad into the room, or to be considering Dad within this to kind of, in ways that don't invisibilise his effect on Max?
Yeah, look, I think it's a really important point, and people in our audience have picked up on it. We don't even know Dad's name, so we're talking about Max's dad, and he's obviously important in Max's life. He's someone that Max is spending quite a lot of time with, and Max has got some strong worries perhaps about his relationship with Dad. So I think this is not an uncommon scenario for me, where I have the mum often bringing the child along, and so I'm always wanting to ask about Dad and thinking about whether it's appropriate for Dad to come to some sessions. Sometimes it ends up being Mum and Dad, and this is a complexity of working with children. And under Medicare, it doesn't capture this very well. So some of this, we would do better in some organisations and some ways of working than under Medicare, where the child is the client. It doesn't kind of capture all of this. So we have to work out where are we working and how do we work and what are the ways of working with Dad. But I think we need to bring Dad into the conversation with Max for sure. It's one of those potential risk factors and a potential protective factor if we could be working out how can we improve that relationship, or what are some ways that could happen and how might that happen. So we need to have that conversation and get more information. I think if we're talking about safety planning, we need to include Dad's awareness in that as well, particularly if Max is having these thoughts at Dad's place. We also need to think about risk, and we need to be realistic around that in terms of what Max is telling us and why he's got such strong views about Dad hating him, and whether there are any actual risks that are there that we might need to be thinking about mandatory reporting, for example. So we've got to do our usual groundwork, I think, in all of this that we would typically do. And if we can include Dad physically in the conversation, including some contact with him, whether he comes to a session or whether we follow up with phone calls with permission of Max, and do Semi about that. I think that would be really important. And getting Dad's perspective. So we're missing a piece of the puzzle as well. Dad may well have some input into all of this, and often that is the case, that each person in the family has their own perspective, and that can be really helpful to hear that. But to bring Dad in, include Dad in the conversation, I think is really important, and make sure that he's aware of what work we're doing, and that he can be part of that is really important, and be checking out the risks at the same time, I think is a really good pick up from people, that it is something we need to think about.
Thanks, Lynn. Some questions around this notion of strength-based practice with children who are experiencing distress and despair. Can you talk a little bit about your practice in invoking this idea of strength-based practice in your work?
Yeah, look, I think David and Ariane both talked about this as well, and I think it is important. And again, we don't throw this out because we're talking about something as difficult as suicide risk. I think coming back to strength-based where we can is really important. So what are the strengths and abilities that the child has? And even though they're feeling so down and in such despair, it doesn't mean that there aren't strengths. So trying to illuminate those and noticing those and encouraging others to do that as well, and to get the balance, I think, is important. So we do that through careful listening, through noticing, observing, being curious, noticing some things, helping the child to identify their own strengths as well is really important. So, and I think David's example around means that you care about people or you're worried about people, and that tells us something about that others are important, and you've got this care factor, and you really care about others, and you care about your relationship. So I think we can identify through the gathering information that we can identify some of these things and capture them. And of course, with children, there may be activities that we do that are very actively identifying strengths, and there are strength cards from St. Luke's and ways of actually balancing our hard conversations with some of these strength-filled conversations as well. So validating, listening, taking opportunities to notice the positives as well as hearing the challenges. So doing that balancing of both of those things, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. Ariane, you talked a little bit today about working within your own family with a really helpful practitioner who really supported your children and family when things were quite tough. Wondering whether you could speak to some of the specific skills or values that the practitioner demonstrated, which were so helpful for you and your family.
Yeah, I think probably the first thing was, of course, that our practitioner believed us. We presented with, I'm thinking of one child in particular who came out to us and expressed that she did not feel comfortable the gender she'd been born, and that she felt like a girl trapped in a boy's body. And the therapist that we went to straight away just believed her. I think it's was incredibly refreshing to not have to fight to be listened to. We had to fight with our GP to kind of get her to give us the referral to the psychologist. So just listening and believing what you're saying is actually incredibly powerful. I think everybody wants to be seen. And to be seen and to be validated is such a powerful thing. Simple thing, powerful thing. I think also our therapist really encouraged me to be curious. I think that's where I learned it, was be curious about what my child thinks, be curious about how they feel, be curious about what they want, be curious about why they want it, to not just accept a piece of information as fact, but be curious about it, which was a great basis for some very powerful conversations. Because, of course, you only have an hour when you're with a therapist, but my child and I have many hours in the week, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. We have a conversation about Rapunzel, and then we have an opportunity to be curious about, well, why does Rapunzel's long hair, like, why do you love that so much? And so I think she really encouraged us to be curious, which was very, very powerful for building my knowledge and my understanding of what was happening inside my child's head. I think other things like our therapist always asked first what we thought we might like to do. And how something might go. So, for example, with my trans daughter, they would ask, okay, so you want to get your ears pierced. How do you think you might handle it if a kid at school teases you about that? What do you think you would do? And then we would workshop it together to find what my child felt comfortable with. And then she gave us a letter that would explain it if a teacher gave my child trouble. So she had that letter in her back pocket if she needed it. So it was a very collaborative process. And I think, bringing in my child's own wisdom and what her comfort level was for dealing with things. That was really good. We would role play those difficult conversations. Things like a mood tracker. I found that incredibly helpful, that my child would track her mood. And so it was developed an awareness in my child of when she was feeling lower and lower, because there would be more, light blue and dark blue days. But it also gave me a very easy way to have a look, because my child's at school for half the day, more than half the day. But I can have a look at the tracker and go, actually, we've had a lot of blue days. I need to be paying attention here. So that was really helpful. Pointing out things like apps that would be useful. One of the things, interesting, Lynn was talking about the dad. One of the things that was difficult for us at the beginning is my husband and I were not on the same page, even about my child being at therapy, which was difficult. And so we spent a lot of sessions talking about his reticence, talking about what he might be feeling and what he might be thinking. And one of the things that was really powerful is the therapist really helped always to reframe that in a way that was not that my child could believe the best about her dad, which protected the relationship, which I thought was really, really intuitive and really positive, and actually long term has been relationship saving for them. That she would reframe it as, maybe your dad feels anxious about having this conversation because he really wants to protect you and do what's best for you, and he's nervous about XYZ, and so there would always be that perspective to protect the connection. Our therapist would always positively reinforce the connection between me and my child. So next time you're feeling that way, do you think you could tell mum? Because mum will listen to you. Always reinforcing in small ways, in big ways, that connection, which made me want to up my game big time, because I was being told I could do this in very subtle ways. So I think those things are all really, really helpful. And I think, being seen, and for me, just knowing I didn't have to do it on my own was incredibly freeing, because I wasn't the whole weight of this wasn't on my shoulders. It felt like it for a long time, because I had to help my husband get on board, and all of that can be very difficult, but I wasn't alone. There was somebody else who could see what we were going through, someone else who appreciated it was difficult, and someone who would help us find our way through. Those things were really, really helpful.
Thanks, Ariane. That's such a great answer. Really appreciate you contributing that lived experience to our conversation. Thanks also to our panelists, Dr. Lynn O'Grady and David Newman. Thank you to all of those fantastic questions that have come actually through registration, but also as we've gone along today. And we look forward to joining you during our next webinar that's held between Emerging Minds and aifs. Thank you very much. Bye.